Hey everybody, thanks so much for being here with us today. My name is Woody. I'm one of the pastors on staff here, and I'm excited because today we're continuing our series, Does the Bible Really Say That? This is a great series. We're excited about this one. It's a fun switch up of maybe some of the things we normally do, and we're just looking at kind of some phrases that Christians might normally use or that you hear when people talk about faith or the Bible or life. And today we're looking at a really interesting phrase that gets used a lot, and it's this: God will never give you more than you can handle. God will never give you more than you can handle. Is it true? It sounds great, it sounds nice, but I want to talk first about maybe why we might use this phrase before we look at what the Bible has to say about it. And a couple things come to mind, right, about when you hear this phrase. One, it sounds reassuring, right? This idea that everything's going to be okay, right? And that's really one of the core desires that we all have deep down. We want to know that everything's going to be okay. We want to know that our family is going to be okay and healthy. We want to know that the money's going to come in okay and we'll have what we need. We want to know that God's going to take care of us. And so there's some reassurance that could be found. And I think that's one of the reasons why we like to use this phrase so much, why Christians will use this phrase. In addition to that, something interesting about this phrase that might make it something that we want to use is that we think that God should be fair. Have you ever thought about that? We have this kind of notion deep down that we think God should be fair and God should be loving and that it should happen according to our standards, right? In other words, it would be unfair or unloving for God to give me more than I could handle, right? But I want to throw a question out to us today. What if our standard of fairness and love is different than God's? And what if God has something different or better in mind when it comes to our life? I want us to think about that today. What if God has something better than this? So what does the Bible actually say? Will God give us more than we can handle, or does God never give us more than we can handle? I want to have us turn to 2 Corinthians chapter 1 if you have a Bible with you. If not, I'll read the verses and you can just listen along. In 2 Corinthians chapter 1, Paul, one of the earliest apostles in the church, is writing to a church in Corinth. So 2 Corinthians, his second letter to them, this is how he starts off the letter. He's giving them kind of an update on life and his ministry. He says, verse 8, "We do not want you to be unaware of the affliction we experienced in Asia. For we were so utterly burdened beyond our strength that we despaired of life itself. Indeed, we felt that we had received the sentence of death. But that was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God who raises the dead. He delivered us from such a deadly peril, and he will deliver us. On him we have set our hope that he will deliver us again." So I love how Paul talks about this idea. He's talking about something really difficult that they went through, and we don't really know the exact details. But the point is, even in verse 8, Paul says, I want you to be aware of what happened. I don't want you to be ignorant to the fact that we've gone through afflictions, we've gone through trials, we've suffered, we've walked through challenges. And how he says it in verse 8 is so interesting. We were burdened beyond our strength. And verse 9, we felt that we had received the sentence of death. Now, we need to ask honestly, does that sound like something more than they can handle? Yes, it does, right? Feeling like they received a sentence of death, whether that's literal or metaphorical, feeling like the burden of life was so overwhelming that they could not handle it, is what Paul says happened. And let's be honest, we've all walked through seasons of life where we felt like we could not handle it. So if God would give us more than we could handle, why would he do that? Paul answers that in the very next verse, in verse 9. But this burden, this trial, was to make us rely not on ourselves, but on God. So, can I suggest maybe we rephrase this popular phrase that Christians and people throw around? God will never give you more than you can handle is not really accurate to what Paul's saying, not really accurate to what the Bible teaches. How about we rephrase it and say this? God will never give you more than he can handle. God will never give you more than he can handle, because when it's more than you can handle, it's a sign that God wants you to turn to him and rely on him, just like Paul says. When I recognize that I cannot handle things on my own, it is a sign that I should turn to God. Because if we could handle everything on our own, let's think about it, then we wouldn't need God, right? If we could do everything on our own, we would not turn to God. We would not pray. We would not come to God and seek him and humble ourselves because we could handle it all on our own. This is where maybe the original version of this phrasing might even be dangerous. And I probably rarely use that word in this circumstance. But saying God will never give you more than you can handle could run the risk of producing people, Christians, followers of Jesus, who say that we believe in Jesus, but don't live lives that actually seek Jesus or desire to grow in faith in Jesus. Because if God will never give us more than we can handle, then we can do everything on our own, and there is no need for God. God will give us more than we can handle because God wants us to rely on him. Now, I want to be careful to point out too, not everything in our lives is given from God. Can I clarify some misconceptions? God does not give cancer. God does not cause natural disasters. God may allow those things, but God does not give them. He does not force those on people. Many of those things are simply the result of a fallen and broken and hurting world that is filled with sin. So, God might allow those things, but he does not give everything. So God may allow it, but he will absolutely always redeem it. And that's an important point for us to catch. God is going to redeem everything, and he's going to redeem every trial. So I want to just give two practical applications. When we're going through a trial, when we're experiencing something that we can't handle, when the burden is too much to carry on our own, two ways that we can start to turn trials around. The first one is this: recognize that our weakness is when God's power is demonstrated. Our weakness is when God's power is demonstrated. Can I tell you, this has been a really fun season of life for me, but I've been able to experience some. So right now, my wife and I were expecting our first child, a baby boy coming in September. His name is, just kidding, I'm not going to tell you right now. But one of the exciting things about this season is just thinking about what's to come, looking forward to holding our son in our hands. But one of the challenging parts of this season is trusting God that we don't know what's going to happen. We don't always know if everything's growing well, if he's doing okay. In between ultrasound and doctor's appointment, there can be a lot of anxiety and uncertainty about what's going to happen, and I know that I'm limited. But I know that there's a God that cares for me, who's more powerful than I am. And even though I'm weak and I'm anxious and I'm uncertain, God is powerful. I love how Paul says it later in 2 Corinthians. He builds on this idea when he writes and he talks about how he's praying and God says to him, "My grace is sufficient for you because my power is made perfect in weakness." And can I be honest? We don't need more Christians who feel like they have control. We need more Christians who recognize that weakness can be a strength, because that's when God demonstrates his power, when God shows up. So God can redeem our trials and make them into something great, because his power shows up in our weakness when we can't handle it. The second application for turning trials around is to remember that God's plan is for us to grow in our faith. See, so often we kind of have the wrong goal when it comes to Christianity, right? We believe that Christianity is meant to produce happiness and prosperity in our life, but that's not God's goal for us. God's goal for us throughout our life as a Christian is to grow in our faith. Not in the amount of money that we have, not in the amount of friends that we have or the amount of approval we have from other people, but to grow in our faith, which requires us to trust when we don't understand. When we're in trials and we don't understand, we grow in our faith. Romans 8 says, "We know that all things work together for those who are called according to God's purpose." So those who love God, we know and trust that everything will work together one day. We need to refocus and have the right goal in mind. It's not about earning God's love. It's not about looking good to others. It's not about being the best Christian we could be. It is about growing in our faith and trusting even when we don't always understand. To wrap up, I just want to point this all back to the greatest example. We could never carry these burdens on our own. We're meant to trust God with them. And the reason that we can trust God with them is so important for us today. The reason we can trust God with our burdens is because He's already carried the ultimate burden for us. See, on the cross, Jesus carried the ultimate burden. He handled everything for us. The biggest thing that we could never handle is our own salvation. It takes a God who loves us. It takes Jesus living a perfect life, dying on the cross and resurrecting to take away the sins of the world. And when we trust in Him, we can receive that forgiveness and have a restored relationship with God. So God cares for you. Even in your trials, even in your burdens, God cares for you. It was so cool. Last week, my wife and I got to go on vacation, and we're sitting on the beach in San Diego, and I pick up a little bit of sand. And I'm kind of weird. Maybe no one else's brain works like this. I pick up a little sand and I put it in the palm of my hand. And I tried to count how many grains of sand there were, and I stopped around like 100. And I scanned and looked to the left and looked to the right, and I saw how many, probably millions of grains of sand there were on the beach. And it made me think of this verse. In Psalm 139, the writer says, "How precious are your thoughts for me, God. How vast is the sum of them. Were I to count them, they would outnumber the sand." That's the God that loves us. That's the thoughts that He has towards you, even in our trials, even when we're anxious, even when we're scared, even when we don't want to admit it or tell anybody, even when we feel like we are drowning, like Paul said, and we are on the brink of death. God cares. God is for us. His thoughts for us outnumber the grains of sand on every beach in the entire world, and He cares for us. So be assured of that today. Even in our trial, even when we can't handle it, God can. And the ultimate display of that is Jesus on the cross for us, demonstrating His love. So, mission, we love you. We hope you're encouraged by this series. Next week, we're going to be jumping into an even more fun, challenging topic. I'm going to let Pastor Richard talk about that one, but we are excited that you spent your time with us. We're looking forward to seeing you soon, and we love you.